My name is Banhi Sarkar. I recently graduated from Tata Institute of Social Sciences from Media and Cultural Studies. We are going to have two speakers in this panel, Shabana and Arindam Nandi. We were supposed to have three speakers, but due to health reasons, Aniruddha Mahajan from IIT Bombay could not join us today and present his paper. So, as I'm sure everybody is already aware of the rules, but I'll just repeat it once. Each speaker has around 10 minutes, around 12 minutes for their presentation. At about 10 minutes, I will hold up a white paper in front of my camera. So that would be like a warning that would help you know that your 10 minutes is up. And we will have both the speakers present their paper. And after that, we will move forward with the Q&A session. So all the attendees can post their questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I will take them up once both the speakers have presented their papers. Since we do not have a third speaker today, I think we can have around 12 to 15 minutes for each speaker's presentation. So we will start with Shabana from the English and Foreign Languages Universities, Hyderabad. And the paper is titled Muslim Women and New Discursive Power, New Praxis and Visibility in Hindi Cinema and Social Media. Over to you, Shabana. You can start.
So yeah, let me start the paper. So the title of my paper is Muslim Women and New Discursive Power, New Praxis and Visibilities in Hindi Cinema and Social Media. So Hindi cinema is a powerful medium that has a profound influence on the survival, identity, politics, and religion of each individual or group, as well as on understanding and embracing changes. Female-centric movies began to emerge after the visibility of the powerful feminist movement of the late 2000s, where female characters had been portraying as mere shadow characters or sexual objects. Still, there is no significant change in the image of the Muslim community and Muslim women. Muslim women were seen on screen as mere objects with no personality or individual freedom trapped between religion and their men, rather living within the burqa. It is through the constant portrayal of the same image in film, which has an impeccable impact on the conscience of the people, creates new power relations within the social structure of a society. However, the question of how much the stereotypical portrayal of the Muslim community and its women as other is still relevant. I think it is pertinent to historicize the Muslim women representation, but at the same time, it is more important to understand the changing pattern in which how Hindi cinema normalized the Muslim woman's life and her everyday religious existence, where her subjectivity is understood within the given situation, not in the religious framework. Thus, the paper looks at how a Muslim girl who uses the symbolic veil of oppression, which always been used for stereotypical depictions, here as a strategic essentialism to achieve her dreams. By taking the film Secret Superstar 2017, directed by Advait Chandan, I analyze how the Hindi cinema is trying to accommodate Muslim women as normal marginalized section in the patriarchal society, where the religion Islam is not posited as the obstacle, rather like all other women strive to pursue their honorable existence. This movie shows how a Muslim girl escapes from her father's patriarchal clutches and reaches her dream, while at the same time holds her mother's hand to live her dignified life. The narrative of the film is a direct insight into Insia Malik, a teenage girl's journey towards her dream of becoming a great singer, represents all the girls who are trying to escape from the patriarchal structure of their family and society, find their own dreams and spaces, and create a new world of gender equality. The deep mother-daughter bond and a true-to-life depiction of struggling, passionate young girl deals with the social issues including feminism, gender equality, stereotyping, and domestic violence as well. Farouk's father-husband character, and every time the characters every knocks on the door and it is his homecoming increases the fear of the women inside the house, and the automatic switching on to kind of enslavement take place in many houses even today. Nejma, as a mother who forgot to leave her own, is economically depends on her husband, bought a guitar for her daughter at the age of 6, and then bought a laptop at the age of 15 to give wings to her dreams. Insia and Nejma are not portrayed as victims, showing the Muslim faith or religious fundamentalism. and their prayer and wearing burqa is showed as quite normal or rather choice of their comfort in different occasions. Najma's mother character turns her voiceless voice into her daughter's voice. Every decision and strategy she makes to turn the darkness in her life into a light for her daughter shows the strong female resistance within her. Here, patriarchy fails in the face of the determination of a girl and her mother who are trying to live their life finding alternative ways when her father invades with the desire to come to the public space and become a singer. Realizing the potential of new technology and connected world of internet, she brings the world into her space by telling her mother to buy her a laptop. The online world offers different levels of agency for the individual can make the private to public sphere. Social media opens up multiple opportunities to the marginalized and they can acquire agency as they enable the renegotiations of what is considered private and what is considered public in public life. Thus, the idea of hyperfast public sphere as a civic participation in the public opinion becomes a metaphor in the present digital world where women make their own creative strategies to get recognized in the public spaces. As Insia gets a laptop on her 15th birthday as a gift from her mother, Insia, her mother, grandmother, and little brother see the world, learn new things, try new recipes, and enjoy the color of life. By showing her mother the map of the world on her laptop and pointing out at her place Baroda in it, she shows her ardent desire to conquer the world as a great singer, as she says, Ammi, how much small is our Baroda? She constantly argues with her mother to understand the world outside and escape from her father by promising that she will be capable to look after everything once the world knows her singing talent. Recognizing the possibilities of creating her own video and uploading it on YouTube, she decided to let the world know her voice. When she wakes up when she wakes up one night and picks up the guitar and tries to record her song, suddenly being conscious about her visibility, she gets frustrated. She tells her mother that she wants to make a YouTube channel for herself to upload her own songs. When mother says, I quote, it's 3 o'clock, stop dreaming and sleep. She retorts that, what is this, Ammi? First you are asking me to stop dreaming and then to sleep. Don't you dream of while going to bed automatically? You tell me why we wake up in the morning every day. It is to make our dream reality. Otherwise, what is the point in waking up every day? Dreaming is the basic right, and at least everyone should have the right to dream. Unquote. She again continues, I quote, I want the world to hear my voice, not only my school, Baroda, India, and I want to tell the whole world that I am the best singer. I unquote. Najma throws the burqa in front of her daughter and says that this is the best idea. Najma tells to Insia that you want the whole world to hear your voice. It's not about showing your face or not, it's about hearing your voice. When Insia does not understand anything again, Nejma says, I'm not telling you to change the station, but to change the train to get to the station. Although she is not very interested, she wears her burqa and holds a guitar in her hand and records a song for the first time and uploads to her own YouTube channel named Secret Superstar. Here, the YouTube offers a liberating territory of one's own, a place to resist a traditionally imposed subordinate identity, the virtual nature of the internet, the structure of interconnections in cyberspace that draws participants into ongoing discourses on issues of feminism, patriarchy, and gender politics, and the textual process of self-expression without the limitation of the space restrictions offers new possibilities for women's agency and empowerment. It acts as a tool for the design of freely chosen identities. Along with this, burqa is chosen as a strategic essentialism where it allows Insia to achieve her dream. She becomes visible under the veil and challenges her patriarchal father. This move from both Nejma and Insia again challenge the liberal understanding of feminism, in which they argue for the complete visibility and freedom without understanding the social structure and different kinds of existence of women across the world. The predicated agency is challenged with the strategic essentialism and subjectivity of both these women. When they're left with no choices, it's a good idea to be creative with what is available. And here, the veil or burqa is becoming part of feminine performance, or rather a choice of the situation, not a symbol of submission. The women became the legitimate actors in the public space with their own voice. Najma and Insia rejoice when they see the secret superstar as the new internet sensation of the world and how eagerly the world is waiting to hear next song. Najma is happy inside when Insia communicates with her followers using the chat facility of social media and says that her voice is heard all over the world by crossing the geographical boundaries. As she enjoys the new life, her father broke her guitar when he finds that she failed in the exam. And again, he asks her to break the laptop when he comes to know that Najma brought the laptop by selling her gold necklace. Insia cannot bear the humiliation of herself and her mother's pathetic condition as Farooq beats her for everything. She decides to separate her parents. When she comes to know that her father is planning to go Riyadh and wants Insia to get married with his friend's son, she staunchly decides what is next. She has known Shakti Kumar, a well-known music director, through some TV music reality shows, and suddenly by seeing the news of divorce of Shakti Kumar that was flashing on the television news channel, she decided to contact and meet him at the earliest to save her mother, not to prosper in her career. She contacts Shakti Kumar and informs him that she is ready to come to Mumbai to record a song for him but needs a help from him in return. One day, on the day, she leaves the school without any worries and reaches Shakti Kumar's studio wearing a burqa very confidently. What is shown there is that she knows how to make the choices accordingly what she wants to achieve, and in her case, burqa acts as a liberating tool. After making sure that Shakti Kumar will hide her identity, she records the song and everyone who hears it blends in her voice. She later tells him that he has to help her to meet his wife's lawyer to save his mother by getting divorced. And when he asks her why can't she meet his lawyer, and then she replies, it is to win, not to lose. So in a way, convincing him, she sees the lawyer and returns with the required papers. Her mother, who knows all this, after knowing all this, is angry with her and says she did not know how much her daughter is grown. She continues, I quote, your father did not ask my consent to get married, and now you have not asked my consent for a divorce. Later, realizing the hardship her mother had endured since giving to her birth, she decided to go to Riyadh with her father as her mother decided. Meanwhile, she is nominated for that year's Glamorous Best Singer Award for the song she sang for Shakti Kumar. And both the award function and her departure to Riyadh comes on same day. And after reaching the airport, when they asked to pay for extra load from the airport, Farooq, the father, says that everything has already been measured and confirmed, and immediately catches his eyes with the guitar and asks Najma to throw away. The furious Insia takes the guitar and walks towards the dustbin and throw it. Najma takes it and says, I cannot get rid of it. This is my child's life. In the midst of a lot of argument, Najma takes a divorce paper given to her by Insia from her bag, saying that she and her children would not be with him without the guitar. She signs and reveals that her daughter is the super seeker star. Najma leaves the husband and takes her two children straight to the award function. Both Nejma and Insi are in burqa and sit in the award function. Even if someone else is chosen as the best singer, she invites the secret superstar to the stage, saying that she is not the one who deserves it, but it owes to our secret superstar. Finally, she walks towards the stage as she always drummed and lifts her veil and shows her face to everyone. Here, she lifts her veil and removes the burqa against being oppressed by patriarchy, not asked to come out from her compulsory dress or religion. From the stage, she says, my mother is the best in the world. My mother is the real secret superstar. The tagline to mothers and motherhood that appears on the screen at the end of the film says that this is the story of all women trapped in gender inequality in the family and society. What I'm trying to do here is not to show that no woman is oppressed religiously, but that the life of a Muslim woman is the same as in all religions and very normal, and that patriarchy is the problem which enters into the private domain of every house. As always, the burqa symbolizes the oppression in our public consciousness has to be changed, and the creative strategic political existence of different people need to be understood within the context. The characters Insia and Nejma show how these women are able to understand the limitations and strategize their needs, showing their multiple layers of selves and agential power relations. The understanding of the burqa practice in this discourse is patriarchal bargaining, as Dennis Kandyoji identifies, in which he considers women's strategies as, I quote, within a set of constraints, to maximize security and optimize life options with varying potential for active or passive resistance in the face of oppression. Unquote. The question of women's agency in the case of wearing burqa can be understood based on what Paul Kokelman, how Paul Kokelman's differentiation between residential agency and representational agency. Residential determines meaning of the object as per and when it may be expressed. On the other hand, representational agency is understood in relation to knowledge and consciousness, which thematizes the process of meaning making as what and how we construct the meaning as part of the majority social process making. The core difference between residential and representational agency is that between power and knowledge, while the former is all about having power over social process and actions, the latter is knowledge about social process and action, which informs the course of one's action. So agency of any action has two dimensions. One is one is choice, that is choosing from the given option, and the other one is invention, taking culturally unavailable or as a strategy. Here, the burqa wearing of both Nejma and Insia comes out of the necessity which comes under residential agency, where they have the control over the expression of meaning and determines where and when it has to be used. Whatever would be the end result, they are very much clear to those are very much clear to these women. But they have no ability to control how the rest understand it, so it is often read without agency. The multiple rationale of these women's agency and exercise need to be understood without simply categorizing a group of people as other. Stuart Hall defines representation as a process by which meaning is produced and exchanged, and it involves the use of language, signs, and images. It stands for or represent things. Thus, the construction of the specific identity categories a group of people with the continuous images or theme reinstates the perspectives of the people. Here, the intentional and constructivist approaches to representation, as identified by Hall, explicate how does the intentional approach controls over the meaning of what is shown, but the constructivist approach, it is to whom to presented make the meaning based on their prior understanding. Here, this idea of knowledge production can connect with Kokelman's idea of representational agency, where the representation of the other is interpreted by the observers on the basis of their own public understanding. So coming to conclusion, I quote Osella, the representation, portrayal, or depiction of the veiled Muslim women has achieved and been successful in gaining iconic status both in India as well as globally. It has become a trope in support of the clash and conflict of the civilization's argument, flanked by the civilized Hindus and the barbaric Muslims in India. The women's dress in India is produced, performed, and interpreted throughout in the course of the opposition of putatively Hindu, thus the Indian sari and Muslim dress an un-Indian way, unquote. The limitation of mobility of women in terms of both identity and space is challenged by burqa and social media, and the efforts of INSIA leads to new social and political changes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabana, for that very insightful analysis on the film Secret Superstar. Moving on with our next speaker, we have Arindam Nandi from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Arindam is going to present a paper titled A Study in Pink, How Narratives of Purity or Violation De-Revolutionize the Female Body. Over to you, Arindam. You can start.
So the title of my presentation reads, A Study in Pink, How Narratives of Purity Violation De-Revolutionize the Female Body. Two somewhat oppositional factions in the discourse of contemporary women's liberation, subscribing and corresponding to two different kinds of politics, ideologies, and socio-cultural ethics can be seen coexisting in popular cultural narratives of Bollywood cinema. Number one, cinematic narratives that focus on the importance of the purity and the possible violation of the female body. And number two, a narrative faction that emphasizes upon scenes of rigorous feminist protest, both sexual and otherwise. The narratives of female purity and violation is seen enumerating a kind of politics that is socially normative, psychologically passive, and ideologically conformist, rendering very little, if at all, any agency to women within the cinematic space of representation. Rather, these particular kinds of narratives generally foreground the female body as a sexualized object that neither has any self-referential subjectivity nor possess the ability to move beyond the social markers of sex, gender, and reproduction. On the other hand, of the ideological spectrum, narratives of protest, primarily produced by popular art house cinema corporations, are encountered by the film-going audience as representing the struggles of resisting such an essentializing of women as the subservient sex, as are depicted in the mainstream commercial cinema of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Not only are these narratives successful in creating a countercultural space of female representation in Indian cinema, but also and consequently generate an ethics of perversion and dissent, or what Jacques Derrida calls a perverformative that enable the use of the female body as a weapon of both resisting and inflicting violence. This presentation will attempt to investigate Amitabh Bachchan's starrer Pink as a cinematic narrative that eulogizes the female gender as an embodiment of dignity, self-honor, and sexual modesty, hence transforming the former into a docile body. It will then juxtapose Aniruddha Roy Chaudhury's film with a more radical politics of protest found in Ketan Mehta's Mirch Masala, Shekhar Kapoor's Bandit Queen, and Madhur Bhandarkar's Chandni Bar that explore the perverformative themes of subversive power and female resistance that are directed against normative systems of order that promote an ethics of self-abnegation and male violence. Aniruddha Chaudhury's film Pink traces the events of a single night where Minal Arora, played by Tapasi Pannu, Falak Ali, played by Kirti Kolhari, and Andrea Tarang, played by her namesake, are introduced to Rajveer Singh and Ronak Anand, aka Dumpy, by Falak's childhood friend Vishwajyoti Ghosh during a rock concert. Following the concert, all 6 of them decide to go to a resort, after which a series of events transpire that finally end with Rajveer Singh's attempted sexual assault on Mrinal Arora and the latter grievously injuring Rajveer with a glass bottle. 2 FIRs are filed, one from each end, and the trial begins in court with 2 different sets of charges and complaints, and I quote, soliciting section 320 to be read with section 324, causing grievous injury, and section 307, attempt to murder, unquote. On the one end, pitted against, and I quote again, section 354, outraging the modesty of a woman, quote end, on the other end. As defense against the charges filed against Minal Arora and her 2 friends, Deepak Sehgal, played by Amitabh Bachchan, subsequently draws up a narrative of female security in a world that is dominated by masculine rules and proposes 13 rules of female safety in a hypothetical manual that goes on to ironically enumerate at various times during the course of the trial, beginning with his opening statement. Yet all these 13 ironic rules of conduct that Sehgal lists fall under the discursive rubric of his original defense charge under section 354, that of outraging the modesty of a woman. The ideological spirit of the whole movie and the trial is thereby made to shift from a discourse on sexual exchange, one that is accentuated by the prosecuting attorney Prashant Mehta, and one that had initially focused on the accusatory terms of exchange agreed upon by the 2 parties involved in the case, allegedly money for sex, into a narrative of verbal consent, sexual morality, and female modesty. This presentation poses 3 different problematics as responses to the defense drawn up by the 3 represented women in court. Number 1, that instead of investigating an event of violence, that is forceful assault, as an act of violence committed in order to commit injury, the critical occurrence of the eventual night is interpreted in terms of the social morality of sex and sexual modesty. Number 2, that the sexual agency exercised by the 3 women that border on an economy of exchange, that is sex for money, an accusation that Falak Ali agrees to in front of the whole court, is ignored by the discourse of the judiciary and covered up consequently by the defendant himself on the grounds of sexual morality. And number 3, that the construction of the defense of an act of female agency, that is Minal's act of self-defense, is reduced to 13 regulations in a hypothetical rule book drawn up by a masculine figure of substantial legal power within the discourse of an equally, if not more, masculine judiciary. Therefore, the only two acts of true feminine agency committed by either of the three women on trial, that is the proposition of sexual exchange and the injuring of Rajveer Singh, are not foregrounded but discarded, negated, and subsequently made to be buried under the double discourses of social morality on the one hand and law on the other hand. My work strives to show that this representative refocusing of acts of sexual liberty and agentic violence on feminine propriety in Aniruddha Chaudhary's film Pink not only essentializes the female body on the basis of a sacrosanct sexual desire and modesty that must be preserved and hence must not be violated, but also relegates any possibility of self-driven agency outside of the judiciary on the part of the body that encounters such a violence. According to Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, overtly reactionary artistic representations that aspire to counter particular ideological positions not only fails to do so, but also ends up exemplifying and extending the original discourse under question beyond its orthodox situations. In comparison to this de-revolutionary and anti-agentic stance taken up by Pink in terms of feminine mediation, narratives such as Ketan Mehta's Mirch Masala, Shekhar Kapoor's Bandit Queen, and Madhur Bhandarkar's Chandni Bar openly promote a politics of protest that attempts to bestow agency and mobilize the female body as a weapon of resistance and retaliatory violence. These alternative representations of female empowerment narratives, mostly emerging out of alternate art house cinema, that is very much part of India's popular imagination, not only question blatant and reactionary narratives such as Chaudhary's Pink that only appears to respond to the oppression of women in a masculine phallocentric social world, but actually neutralizes the eventual sense of docility or pathos that is assigned to the female body through such disempowering cultural portrayals. Whereas in Madhur Bhandarkar's Chandni Bar, this counter-reactionary tendency is depicted through the discourse of bar dancing in the movie space. In Ketan Mehta's Mirch Masala, on the other hand, the themes of sexuality and gender violence are used in order to foreground class and caste concerns that are actually problematized over gender roles and biases throughout the extent of the film. In fact, it is the reality of caste oppression depicted in Mirch Masala in a pre-independent and semi-feudal India that serves as the very condition upon which a revolutionary narrative of feminine protest is constructed. Similarly, Phulan Devi's surrender at the end of Bandit Queen does not simply become an act of forceful self-resignation to law and law enforcement, but transcends the judicial discourse by metamorphosing into a political event with significant ramifications for both the Dalit community and the contemporary female subject in the longer run. It is precisely this kind of paradigmatic shift that Chaudhary's Pink promises and attempts to exhibit through its use of strong dialogues, critique of traditional cultural signifiers, and by its powerful play of rhetoric, but fails catastrophically to achieve its ends, instead turning into a faux pas of false narrative of empowerment and critique. This presentation, therefore, not only tries to explain the real and prominent dichotomy that exists between narratives of purity violation and narratives of protest and resistance within the discourse of neo-feminist representations in the Indian film industry, especially over the last 4 to 5 decades, but also demonstrates that in either case, there has been an increase in the attempt to portray various kinds of female subjectivity through the silver screen of contemporary cinema. But then again, and on the flip side, and reverting back to Zizek's argument of a double-layered ideological expansion of normative power, every representation made with the intention of empowerment that fails to do so necessarily doubles back on its own motivations and becomes a weapon of sabotage and self-harm that can be wielded easily by already established systems of power to reinstate its own prerogatives, as happens evidently in Aniruddha Chaudhary's Pink. As an allegedly feminist narrative, it is rather the masculine law and its male agents that both protects the female as well as persecutes her, hence doubly reinforcing masculinity as ideology. The need of the art, therefore, is not only of watertight motivations, but also of representative rigor, a rigor that enunciates very clearly its ideological aims and intentions, a rigor that works flawlessly in order to represent its objectives without possible misinterpretations, and most importantly, a rigor that paves the road of artistic representation towards a kind of politics that gives the woman absolute power over her own destiny and desires, constituting in the process an identity that remains absolutely outside the phallocentric economy of sex and fetish. Thank you.
Thank you, Arindam, for that wonderful presentation. So before we move on to the Q&A that where we have questions from the attendees, I would just like to start with a few of my own comments and questions. So for Shabana, I think that was a very interesting analysis on Secret Superstar. And the part that really spoke to me was the aspect of consent and how you explored that, where, you mentioned that how Insia sort of did not ask the consent of her mother, Najma, before finalizing the divorce papers, and how Najma mentions it. So despite both of them being women, the aspect of consent still remains as integral and important to explore. So that was really interesting. I had just one question for you, and so I don't know if you're aware, but recently the Pakistani actor Riz Ahmed had started this fellowship where he intends to support Muslim artists and creators to address Muslim representation on screen. And it was based on this USC Annenberg's new study where they focused on Muslim representation in media, and which found that that less than 10% of top grossing films from 2017 to 2019 even had a Muslim character, and even less than 2% like had speaking roles in them. So I wanted to ask you that how do you think initiatives like these, where you have specific fellowships related to support Muslim creators or to address Muslim representation on screen, how do these initiatives behind the screens can improve the representation of the Muslim community on screen, and particularly the Muslim woman?
Yeah, regarding this kind of fellowship, the first thing is that very recently only this kind of the topic Muslim women is coming to the academies. So it's a very recent phenomenon, because even the kind of area when we take Islamic feminism, it is also started to explore in different kind of it just started to explore. So the new studies are coming. So in yeah, followed by all these studies. Now a kind of the Muslim women's voice is here all over, at least in the academic area, we can hear who is Muslim women and the different existence of Muslim women. Because what we will see that it is always a kind of homogeneous identity for the Muslim community. And then when it comes to Muslim women, it was always the same thing, always under the male burqa, without giving any individuality or subjectivity, they were continuously represented like that. So now, due to the emergence of these kinds of Islamic feminism and kind of subaltern studies, so this kind of identity question is emerging, and again the national politics. So when we take all these things together, so we can say that many people are coming forward and they are not speaking about the identity of the Muslim women. So, and it's not that we cannot earlier, in the beginning of these studies also, we always used to associate Muslim women and the religion. We used to save the women from the religion, not from the patriarchy. So that was the trend in the beginning. So that has to be changed. So that is changing. That also we can see, because now again by using new theoretical framework and they kind of using not merely getting into the representation, we have to concentrate more on the socio-political realities, means where they live, their location, their socio-political conditions, because there are different existence for even for a Muslim woman. So their educational background, family background, political existence. So all these things have to be taken together when we speak about who is a Muslim woman. So as you asked about these kinds of fellowship, when we get these kinds of fellowship, I am sure that more women will come forward. Not only women, more people will come forward, and at least they will think about, yeah, there is a need to study about Muslim women, or at least from the Muslim women community itself, they will come forward and to it would be like to part of kind of making their own films, their own videos, and then to get into the public. So all these things will be happening if all these if these kinds of fellowship will be given to not only in Pakistan, wherever, even in India also, it is very much needed. So I think that's a good idea. So it can enrich that this is just a narrow even my entire research area is Muslim women, and it's focused on Muslim women and Kerala. So even that also, when I start to speak about those things, there are so many limitations for me. So I don't know what are the things I can say, because whenever I speak about Muslim women and the representation or their life, it is always like if people ask what is the true, do
Yeah.
a research. It is always like they always think that okay, they are always suppressed, and it is always identity question. You are always
Right.
coming with the identity question. So there is nothing new. That is the argument in a general perspective I always face, even in my university. Like when I speak with my colleagues and other people. So that we have to change. So this kind of scholarship will be very helpful to go to conduct a real field work study, because once we start to do that kind of ethnographic studies, we will get into the reality or the everyday life of the Muslim women, especially the Muslim women. That is more needed than getting into this identity and representation question. Then automatically we can take those answers to these kinds of screen representation and these kind of literature. I think that will be more useful and will be benefit for the community and the Muslim women itself.
Right. Right. Thank you, Shabana. So coming to Arindam, your paper also reminded me of Lena Yadav's Parched, and how sexual agency and agentic violence is sort of explored in that film. So I had two questions for you, but I'll just go ahead with one, and maybe if we have time, I'll come back later to my second question. So I wanted to ask you that how would you address the question of no that was raised in the film Pink, and it was how largely emphasized upon as the basis of maintaining female agency and sexual agency. So, like, do you think that it can cover the various aspects of the complexity of informed consent, or does it just reduce it down to one word and it's justified usage in all situations?
Okay, you said the word no, right?
Yeah, the no, like how it was emphasized in the film Pink.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the major problems that I had with the film, because it's like you kind of focus all your defense of a particular event on a single term that basically has no meaning, because until and unless it is recognized by the other gender, right? So this also falls into the question of consent, right? Because the word no inside the movie works through the question of consent. Now the problem of consent in the movie and even outside the movie is a very specific one, and the problem of consent obviously relates to, by extension, the problem of a social contract between the two genders, right? So consent does not work until and unless it is recognized by both the genders as being the same thing, as meaning the same thing for the other, right? But herein lies the problem, basically, because a film that tries to project the agency of woman, kind of by foregrounding the question of consent, what it does is that by default it gives away 50% of agency to the male counterpart. No, because what it does is, like, then it completely talks about a particular question or a particular notion that cannot be completed, that cannot be like put forward or manifested without the permission of the other male, of the other, as in the male, right? So this was the first of all. So that's basically it. I mean, because the word no does not exist separately out of the question of consent. I mean, it falls into the question of consent, and the problem of consent is that the female does not have absolute power over the question of consent. So it doesn't, it kind of, by extension, it talks about a very different thing. It talks about, as I said, a social contract where the woman and the female and the male recognizes what consent means on equal terms, as a signifier that means the same thing for both of them. And that is a very egalitarian kind of thought that has not been talked about in the movie at all. The movie talks about how a male inflicts violence on a female, especially in a society which is male dominated. So there is no egalitarianism at all. So yeah.
Thank you. So Shilpa Farke ma'am has a comment and a question for both of you, I think. She says that it's so interesting that both papers address questions of essentialism. I was wondering if you both want to speak to the mobilizing of essentialism often in different ways in engaging with gender. So Shabana, do you want to address that first? Arindam, you can also start if you want to address.
No, it's okay. Shabana can go ahead.
Yeah, so speaking about the mobilizing of essentialism, so it's so in the case of, like, the first thing is everyone has their own identity. So I think for everyone that is the most important thing, because like they are capable, if they think that they are capable for speaking themselves, first the thing that we have to agree that So that is the basic idea of one's existence. So then coming to the mobilization, so we know that as we start like as we start a journey, that will be as it progress the journey. I don't know how to know put into the points. So we know that once we start the journey, so many things will change in between. So even when we take the religious fundamentalism or the Muslim women's identity, the question the starting question will be different, and we will be reaching into the conclusion by addressing or by facing different kind of other sub question. So the mobilization. So I think now, yeah, coming there are a lot of ways to mobilize, one's identity and one's existence. As itself in the film Secret Superstar, we see how the girl in Sia is coming out from her own space. So that's a kind of mobilization. She's taking from herself. That was her own initiative. She knows that what she wants, and she knows her limitations also. At the same time, she's using what are available to her. So by using those technological advantages, she is mobilizing herself, and slowly she is progressing towards her journey. At the end of the day, we could see how she became a great singer. So I think that was the most important thing, how the beginning, how she started mobilizing herself, and how she started questioning her identity. So that is the beginning is important. So once we start the journey, I think the automatically we can once we have that strong determination, we can tackle the challenges.
Yeah. Arindam?
Yeah, so I think Pink actually gives us a very good illustration of the problem of mobilizing essentialism, because it becomes kind of impossible. Because you see, the impossibility of mobilization in the case of the three women in the whole film is based on them being stigmatized and taboo, right? So they are being constantly attacked by the local neighboring families because of questionable character, right? So that questionable character, that kind of stigmatizing, that kind of emerges out of essentialism. As counterpoint, I would talk about let's say a movie like Mirch Masala, right? So there is a very funny scene. For me, it's a very ironic and funny scene in Mirch Masala, where what you have is the Subedar, which is played by Nasiruddin Shah, is right. So Nasiruddin Shah wants to so he feels his ego feels violated by because Sonbai has slapped him. Sonbai is a local woman, and Nasiruddin Shah is the Subedar of the village, and Nasiruddin Shah wants to spend a night with Sonbai as compensation for Sonbai slapping him. So what he does, so in the whole movie, what the male is designated as the upholder, as kind of the guardian of female modesty, as the upholder of female sexuality and their well-being and their honor, right? But the moment the Subedar threatens the male, especially the male in power of the village, especially the Mukhia, he contends, and he's prepared to give Sonbai up. So that is also a problem of essentializing, because according to essential gender formations, what you have is the male trying to protect the honor of the woman, but that doesn't happen because the male is threatened by a superior male. So that kind of, and it is only because this kind of essentialism is broken down that female agency becomes possible at the end of the movie. So essentialism, it is very, very difficult to mobilize essentialism because gender essentialism is based on the grounds that it gives an undue advantage to the male and to the masculine agent over the possibility of a feminine agent, right? So it becomes very difficult for a female subject to mobilize herself based on an essentializing identity, which a majority of which has been conferred upon her by the masculine agency, right? Sorry, by the masculine economy of signification. So it has been the male over which that over history has been signifying the female, has been essentializing the female. That essentializing has not been done, at least the majority of it, by the female herself. So any kind of mobilization that emerges out of that kind of essentialism for me becomes ideologically very complicit to the male gender and therefore false.
Right. So continuing with Arindam, Harmanpreet Kaur ma'am asked how can one place the film Pink and its representation vis-a-vis popular Hindi cinema in the contemporary?
Okay, so we have noticed, right? I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, mean, all of us have noticed how Hindi cinema consciously has been trying to foreground the female figure, has been trying to make the female subject instead of the male, right? But one of the difficulties that lies within such an approach is that there are certain, I would say, um, ideological dangers that such representations might fall in, as in any kind of, let's say, any absence of rigor that I had talked about at the very end of my presentation. So any kind of, let's say, loose end or any kind of ideological crack in such a representation, you can very easily double back. For example, take Pink, for example, because we are talking about a film that tries to it is one of the, I think, the path break, one of the major quote unquote feminist films in the last, that has been made in the last 10 years in Hindi cinema. In popular Hindi cinema. Pink, if you ask anybody, I think Pink would be one of the major contenders to be like the most kind of feminist movie. Let's say before Thappad, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, that has been represented in Indian cinema. But just look at how the movie maneuvers through. It is supposed to foreground the female figure. It is supposed to foreground the female subject. But throughout the movie, if you talk about the major characters, there are 4 female major characters. 3 of them have been violated and do not possess the voice to opinionize their own violation. They need a male mediator. They need a male agent to do so. And there is a 4th female figure, which is Amitabh Bachchan's wife, who is disabled and who not disabled. She's ill and on the verge of death. And look at all the major male figures that are present in power, that are present in the movie. No, it is more than 4. First of all, you have the judge who is male. You have the 3 violators who are male. You have Amitabh Bachchan who is male, and you have the defendant. You have the prosecuting lawyer who is male, right? So, at a very surface level, it does pronounce that yes, let's say a male figure is supposedly successful in handing back some kind of agency to the female, but again, it is the male figure who does that, right? So I don't see any kind of novelty. Especially in terms of a change in power differential, especially in gender roles, that comes through a movie like Pink. So yeah, it is obviously a very important question, right? Because we have, I think, 2 sports movies coming up. Either it has come up or it has already been released over the last year, I think. I'll just check which one of them. There is one Shabash Mithu, right, on Mithali Raj's biopic.
Yeah.
That's coming up. And there is another called Rashmi Rocket, which is
Rashmi
by
Rocket,
Tapasi Pandu, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't watched those movies. I haven't watched the first one. I think the second one is still to come out. But again, I don't think any of the movies, whatever happens in the movie, like both of them are biopics, right? So, it again goes back to similar kind of representations having being made in the male domain, right? Which makes it very, very difficult, to come out of a representational web, a representational trap, and create something new that kind of absolutely foregrounds the female in terms of both representation as well as ideology. That becomes very difficult because representations such as these always, fall back into male ideology proper. Because again, you're talking about, a kind of sport, especially if you're talking about the biopic on Mithali Raj, you're talking about a sport that is still being dominated by the masculine gender, right?
Yeah.
I don't see, any kind of, I didn't even know that there was a women's IPL, because I just found
Not
out.
popularized as much anyway.
It's not popularized. No, it's not popularized.
Yeah.
And there are obvious reasons for that to be not popular, both justifiable and not justifiable. But again, it is a male domain. It is still a male domain. And I don't think there has been enough kind of female agency that has been able to change what has happened in the game, what is there already in the game. So it's very precarious. The situation is because, again, we might celebrate the emergence of these so-called feminist narratives in popular culture Hindu cinema, but whether or not they can actually go on and substantiate any kind of real change, and any kind of real change, not only in terms of representation, but also in terms of Bollywood itself, because it's an industry that is male driven. I mean, it is a very male driven industry. So again, yeah, so it's very difficult. It's very precarious, the situation.
Lakshminingam ma'am has a comment for you, Arindam. She says it will be interesting for you to see a Telugu version of Pink titled Vakil Saab, where the entire focus is on the advocate. Interesting example of male savior prototype, also peppered with a lot of violence beyond the court arguments.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into it. Thanks a lot. I'll definitely.
Okay, so coming to Shabana, Shilpa ma'am question, I was wondering how you might locate the use of the hijab burqa in the film Secret Superstar in the light of the denial of education to women wearing the hijab in some colleges of Karnataka. Do we now read the film differently? Can we mobilize the film to make arguments, or do these exist in different silos?
So as you said, as I already said, there are different existence even among the Muslim women. So even when we take India, the different parts of India, the Muslim community is very different and the practices is very different. Hijab or wearing or covering the face, that practice is also very different. It's varying from region to region. So when I take the example of Kerala, we don't have that kind of practices to covering the face. And when it comes to other parts of India, so there are kind of practices the women are covering the face. So it means I think more than taking it's a kind of unanimous religious essential practice. It is a kind of cultural practice. So and when we are living in a kind of secular India, so everyone has the right to practice whatever they want. So when we take the case of Karnataka issue, the hijab issue, so there those group of people, they are very much into that religious identity. They have been, for years, they have been continuously practicing face. So that is why they are associating their identity with that religious thing. So for them, that becomes the first priority. And then the other things are coming to the next priority list. So that is why, like in the suddenly when somebody asks them to remove the cover, the veil or the hijab, it will be very difficult because they are being habituated and they are a kind of they believe that that is a kind of religious practice and they have the right to do because the constitution is providing that. So rather than objecting that thing, but the as an democratic nation, what we have to offer is that first what are the essential things that they needed, that we have to give more importance. Education is more important and the living condition is important and their economic, all these things that we have to first taken into the priority list than suddenly barging into their kind of religious existence. That would be very difficult. So and now what we see is that many the girls from the college, they were dropping and they avoid the exam and they went back. So they know that though they are the new generation students, but still they have their own limitation. So we have to give a choice for them to what they can be, by giving some time what they actually want and how they read these kinds of hijab and religious practices and how they associate their individuality or identity along with this. So then it doesn't mean that by just covering their face or wearing hijab, they have to be denied the education, the right to education. So they're also reading the film Secret Superstar along with this thing, they have to use their own, they have their own strategies. So they can sometimes their parents, they're no old generation, they may not be allowing the girls to come out from the home and to go to the higher education. So maybe they're just allowing the girls to opt for higher education just following all the religious practices by covering the face or the body. So if we deny that thing also, what we are denying, that exactly we are cutting off their right to come into the higher education. So they will be left with no other choice. So we have to take like at least now the girls are coming to the college by wearing whatever they want and getting the education. So it is all like will kind of that slowly everything will change. But first thing how to like what we have to think that what is their cultural and religious identity, how these things are associated, how that can be taken into the public sphere, and how it can be benefited for their own life. Not like once we remove everything, like maybe they cannot access the education, they have forever they have to be inside the house. So rather than doing that thing, so I think like we have to accept what they want, and not and by discussing with all these new people, we have to the nation or the whatever the whoever is coming with the new rules and regulations, we have to like they have to more conscious about actually what is the reality and how it will seriously affect the coming generation. So that's what I think.
Right. Thanks, Shabana. So, we have another question for Shabana, but I'll go to the question that we have for Arindam first. So, Deepthi asks that since you chose to read Pink against three other films, I would like to ask the rationale behind choosing Bandit Queen, because critique exists against director Shekhar Gupta for using the story of Phulan Devi while completely denying her agency in real life. The film is now read as a capitalist appropriation and exploitation of a Dalit woman. Arindam, if you could address
Okay, so I'll just look into something. Yeah. So yeah, okay. So I myself did not read Bandit Queen as a capitalist appropriation. I don't remember there being any kind of capitalist like concerns in the movie throughout the movie. Maybe at the very end when she surrenders to the Indian to the legal system. But before that, I mean, all concerns were strictly restricted to caste, right? I mean, whether they had, I mean, I, yeah, I don't myself remember there being any kind of like capitalist elements before the very end of the movie. If you're talking about that, then maybe yes, of course. But um, about in terms of exploitation, yes, there is exploitation, of course, but it is something that Phulan somewhat successfully transcends. I mean, she is not the kind of heroine that that remains stigmatized, immodest, and violated. That remains the stigmatized, immodest, and violated woman who suffers morally and internally. She transcends such a situation to make a name for herself. Right? Yes, image making might have been like again might fall into the male economy, but that is not really my point. My comparison was with my focus was on how Phulan is able to transcend the social morality of her own conditions and make a name for herself going against the grain of social norms. Yeah. If that answers your question.
Right. Okay. So, Lakshmi Lingam ma'am asks Shabana that I often find the question of religious identity and its significance in cinema comes up only if when the women protagonist is middle or lower class. If it is upper class, the religion is not seen as a significant. For example, Guilty Minds, the web series, there the woman protagonist is a lawyer and nowhere do we see her religious identity coming into any discussion or contestation. So, can you reflect on that?
Yeah, it is not about upper class or upper class Muslim women is not portrayed within the religious identity. So I think it's a kind of as we it's a kind of other stereotypical representation. It is always the people who belong to lower class or no middle class. It is always the women is always coming within burqa and parda. And when it comes to upper class, it is always portrayed as highly educated, modern, and wearing the kind of normal like the so-called secular sari, churidar, those kinds of things. That's the kind of representation we have been shown for this much of years. So it doesn't mean that it is always like in the reality. It is like there are like both in lower class and upper class. There are women who sometimes wear burqa, who sometimes wear normal churidar or sari. So that is the reality. But what I think is that it's the representation that is showing like that. Even in Malayalam film also it is like that also. If a woman is highly educated or she belongs to a kind of upper class, she is always in a kind of modern dress only. So it shows that she is not limited or confined into the religious identity or that patriarchal thing. So that's like, I think that is not the reality. That is just a filmic representation that is shown. In both cases, there are like choices. Women are making choices. Like in the case of what they are wearing and how they have to present it in the, because even when we take the lower class Muslim women, even like who there are women in Kerala who are going for kind of labor work, part of Kudumbashri, those kinds of things. So most of the women, like those labor work women, are not going out by wearing burqa and not doing those kinds of heavy work. They're just going with the kind of normal dress. So at the same time, like other women from the upper middle class women, they are like highly educated and they're going to the court or no, any other professional space by wearing kind of both some, like if like how they are associating their religious identity. I think that matters. If they are like showing if they want to show that they are strong believer, doesn't mean that they have to always wear burqa. People wear churidar or whatever by covering the body part, and at the same time like a kind of people, it's a kind of association, or what we really want to present or what is identity question. I think it's not about a class question, but it's more the representation things how to be changed.
Thank you, Shabana. So we don't have any more questions from the attendees, but we still have a few more minutes. So I would just like to go back to one more question I had for Arindam, and then maybe we can close the session. So Arindam, I wanted to ask that as you mentioned in your paper that how Pink's central motive was focused on the juridico-patriarch, the defense, the honor, and the dignity of women, as they opposed to women taking the control and exercising their own agency, like it is explored in Mirch Masala. So I wanted to ask you that how do you think that the question of female agency can be explored in the juridical systems as represented in films?
Is a very difficult question, I suppose, because as is represented in Pink at least, and also in all those very conventional representations of Indian courts in Hindi films over the years. I mean, it has been shown to be a very masculine domain.
Yeah.
The law itself is masculine. I mean, it's considered to be masculine by many, many critical thinkers, by many philosophers. The law is considered to be strictly a masculine discourse that is created in order to impose order on society, and as well as on sexual difference and as well as on gender difference. But the only way, I suppose, to talk about, I remember, okay, so the one thing that there is this one talk I remember going to. It was in Jadavpur University. It was a talk given by Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, and it was given in honor of, I remember the female poet that she was talking about. It was an inaugural talk for the women's department, I mean, for the women's studies department. And she talked about a particular kind of concept that she was working on, and she has been working on, and she has written explicitly on it. It's called affirmative sabotage, uh, where the revolutionary agent enters the masculine discourse or the normative discourse that she wants to alter or destroy, and then she modifies it from the inside. So it's about what she, quote unquote, what Gayatri Spivak talks about is initially saying yes to the enemy. You say yes to the enemy, you enter the enemy's territory, and then you destabilize it, decenter it, and then alter it from the inside. But which is very, very difficult, because even now, in terms of Indian law, very few female judges, very few female advocates in comparison to the rising male numbers. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about in films, I mean, if you're talking about popular cinema, trying to, because at the end of the day, popular cinema, there is a responsibility on popular cinema to kind of represent what is actually going on in the Indian social space. And I don't see much hope there, to be very honest.
Lakshmi ma'am asks if the female poet you were mentioning was Mahashata Devi. Was it her?
No. It was not Mahashita Devi. It was it was was Nandita Sen's grandmother. I have it just I can't remember it. Just can't.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, thank you for addressing that. So we're at the end of our second session. Our third session, the panel is called Queer Trajectories. It starts at 3:30 p.m. So I would request all the attendees to stay back on this link. You can take a break for 15 minutes, go grab your chai and all, and come back at 3:30.
So it was Radharani Devi. She's Nandita Dev Sen's mother. So Radharani Devi.
Okay, all right. Great. So yeah, and I would request all the panelists to join the attendee link for the next session, and the ones who are panelists for the next session, they can join the panelist link. So see you at the next Queer Trajectories panel. Thank you so much for joining and for presenting your papers, and for all the attendees for joining the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.